Pentagon says there are no limits on how Israel uses U.S. weapons as death toll climbs amid airstrikes in Gaza.
Here's a summary of the article.
The U.S. is not putting any limits on how Israel uses U.S.-provided weapons in its bloody war against Hamas that has killed thousands of Palestinian civilians and destroyed parts of the Gaza Strip, the Pentagon says as the Israel Defense Forces ramps up its retaliatory attacks in the area. On Monday, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh told that we are not putting any limits on how Israel uses weapons that are provided, Voice of America national security correspondent Jeff Selden reported. The U.S. has provided unwavering support for Israel since Hamas militants conducted surprise terror attacks on October 7, killing some 1,400 people, injuring another 5,400, and taking over 200 hostages into Gaza. In response to those attacks, Israel began a relentless and devastating bombing campaign in Gaza, launching strikes against the Strip before beginning a ground assault last weekend, with Israeli tanks advancing on Gaza City. Despite the U.S. saying it continues to prioritize Israel minimizing civilian casualties, officials have said the war will still be costly and take a heavy toll on the civilian population in Gaza. Josh Paul, former director of the Office of Congressional and Public Affairs and Bureau of Political Military Affairs at U.S. Department of State, retired amid U.S. support for Israel after the Hamas attacks and has criticized the Biden administration's response to the conflict. In the wake of the Hamas attacks on Israel and during the subsequent war against the militants in Gaza, the U.S. has repeatedly said that it supports Israel's right to defend itself.
This post received a score of 8,400, with an upvote ratio of 89%. Here are the top comments in response to this article.
Pentagon: there's no limit on how Israel uses US weapons. Also Pentagon: here, have more weapons for you to use without limits.
That's just billions of US dollars that goes right back to the US arms industry.
I love the typical modern story of Americans being punished for their hard work constantly scrolling across my face. I wish that money would go someplace else.
War crimes are okay when we do it.
That picture is haunting.
There was a video in the first week of the offensive with explosions like this within a second of another across the city. Whole buildings just exploding. My initial thought was how impossible it was to not have civilian casualties.
If you fight a battle in a city, you will have civilians killed. If the object is to kill civilians, you cut their routes to flee. If the object is to reduce civilians' causalities, you warn them and allow them time to flee.
There isn't really a lot of infrastructure to make fleeing easier, and outside of going into a desert without any camps or resources, no place for civilians to flee to. None of Gaza's neighbors would allow them in, Egypt, Israel or Jordan, which I guess doesn't really matter, because they have no physical way of fleeing anyway. Which also doesn't matter, because even if they had ships, planes and trains, and a camp in Israel, Jordan and Egypt they could flee to in a nation of their choosing, Hamas wouldn't allow them to flee. Go into the desert and die of exposure and risk IEDs and retaliation from Hamas for fleeing? Staying in Hamas-occupied territory to be bombed by Israel?
It was fun asking Bing Chat AI all potential routes to evacuate Gaza and then to ask which ones can be used. The answer was that they had 3 possible options, all of which were prohibited. I was like, well, that's a bummer, and it's like, yeah, pretty much. Seriously, stuck in a war zone, that's messed.
They are not limiting Israel, but the U.S. presence is there. Israel consult with the U.S. in every step of the way.
Is this supposed to be a good thing or?
Privately and within closed doors, the US is probably reminding Israel that Jordan and Egypt are vital US strategic partners as well, and not to do anything to fuck that relationship up. Let's not forget, the US has troops deployed in Jordan and the King of Jordan has been very pro-West. Killing Palestinian children is a political problem in Jordan and can threaten US-Jordanian ties. Apparently we do have troops stationed in Egypt as well.
They absolutely have US troops in Egypt as well.
This video was automatically created by Reddit to speech. The article and comments in this video were selected from Reddit according to their upvotes, and any paraphrasing was performed by smmry.com, without any human intervention.